This year we hired someone to solely write grants. Guess what? We are finding that Bell County is in some type of bubble, and we don't meet the parameters of 99% of the grants. We run solely on tuition. Our teachers work for far less than public schools, but choose to do so because it is their passion to help students that need it the most. OCA is an accredited private school that tailors its educational plans to each student. No one is left behind. We use a formal, norm-referenced assessment, MAP, measures of academic progress, 3 times a school year to assess growth. This tool shows us the learning gaps and helps us to write an educational plan that fits the individual student. We have chosen not to use STAR due to the stress and anxiety that many of our students have faced having to go through it. How is STAR the best measure for student with exceptionalities? Our concern is individual progress. We're not comparing scores of students to another. Parents at OCA are involved in goal making and are required to attend 3 parent-teacher conferences per year. These conferences are used to discuss mastered skills, new goals, and transitional planning if the student is of age. Our students receive clinical speech, occupational, physical, and behavioral therapies during the course of the school day if needed. Many of our families are making great financial sacrifices to send their child to Oak Creek. Parents with multiple children are having to choose which child can attend Oak Creek because sending more than one is not doable. Parents are working multiple jobs and side jobs to pay for tuition. Some of our parents ask family members to help pay tuition each month. Savings and retirement accounts are being drained so that parents can pay for a school option. I have the privilege to meet many families that are in need of Oak Creek. A lot of them are referred to us by local doctors, psychologists, and psychiatrists. These professionals realize that a smaller specialty school is what their patients need. After the tour and discussion of curriculum, the parents are always ready to enroll their child until they see the tuition. They ask about our limited amount of scholarships and other ways that they can make tuition so their child can attend. It breaks my heart to see them walk out the door knowing I will never see them again due to the cost. This is not fair. Why do the wealthy families only have a choice? All families need a choice, but families of a neurodivergent student should be able to send their student where their individual needs will be met. I appreciate your time today, and I'm hopeful that you will understand the necessity of education savings accounts for students in Texas. I welcome you to visit Oak Creek and see the wonderful things that go on each day. I promise you won't be disappointed.
Thank you, Dr. Hansen. We'll start here with Chairman King.
Thank you, Ms. Bertelson. Thank you for being here. Number one, the Panhandle doesn't get represented in these committees as often as I would like, so I know it's certainly a long ways. So my question is for you. And number one, I missed in your testimony, what is it you teach?
I am currently teaching 3rd grade, but my certification is early childhood through 6th grade generalist.
Okay, and you're teaching at Plainview ISD?
I'm currently teaching in a small community school just outside of Plainview. It's actually Lockney, Texas.
Yes. Well, that is just right outside of my district, but but you are a constituent, and so when we talk about ESAs, and you're talking about you have Plainview and you went to Lockney, which is another ISD, correct?
Yes, sir.
I struggle when I look around House District 88 about how is an ESA, how would an ESA actually help you or your child or children you know go to a private school when you live in Plainview?
Okay, so Plainview has had a private Christian school there that kids can go to. Again, the tuition is rather high, and so because of that reason and because we are in a low-income part of West Texas, it makes it very difficult for people that might consider it, or it might be, it might be within their reach,
right,
to be able to do that if they had some assistance.
And you're referring to Plainview Christian Academy. Are you aware that Plainview Christian Academy by next August is going to be an open enrollment charter school?
Yes, sir.
Public school?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that takes care of that. But outside of Plainview Christian Academy, and I travel House District 88 a lot
Yes,
in
sir.
all these communities. What other private school is anywhere close outside of going to Lubbock or Amarillo that if you're a resident of Hale County and you have an ESA available to you, I still fail to see, with the exception of the very few that, if Plainview Christian Academy remained a private school, which it's not going to, and their limited capacity, what it actually does to help. I mean, I'm not arguing with you. I just want to know what other options you see out there that I'm missing.
Okay, so I don't know that I see a lot of other options. Now, you were saying you made reference to Lubbock and Amarillo. I would say those are probably the closest opportunities. I do know that even since there's been talk of the charter school, and we know for sure, in fact, that it is coming by this next August, that many people are taking their kids out of public school and are trying to make arrangements for their children to be a part of the charter school.
Right, right. But it is a public school that they're moving to. It won't be it's not a private school.
I understand that. However, I do think that the environment and the cultural change will be a huge part of what parents are looking for.
Well, I'm not arguing that at all, and I think you're on the money on that one.
Yes, sir.
My point is, it is a public charter school. It is not going to be a private school.
No,
it's not.
no longer.
And so, you would have the ability under current law to transfer from the ISD to that charter school without an ESA. And so I'm just trying to figure out, because I understand when we're talking about Dr. Buckley's district, and there are private options to serve a bigger array of kids, but
Yes, sir.
for for rural Texas, where you and I live, and I'm not looking to change my zip code except for windy days. I want.
I'm with you on that.
I'm just trying to figure out it's always been my opinion, our choice is to make our public school system the best it can possibly be, because that's the
Yes, sir.
choice we have. Because I don't see it. Do you believe that if we pass an ESA and you make the voucher any amount of money you want it to be, this is hypothetical, do you believe that private schools will come in droves and offer us more choice?
I don't know that they'll come in droves, but I do think we'll have more opportunities to start popping up.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you made a long drive, and I appreciate your testimony.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
All right. Dr. Hansen, of course, I know a lot about your school, and I think my mom might even taught you in the first grade.
She absolutely
And
did.
so I know your commitment to kids, and if you ever get a chance to go to Killeen, take her up on it. It's an amazing experience.
Thank you.
I can't hardly leave there dry-eyed.
Nope.
It's an unbelievable school.
Thank you.
It's actually an old school, an old elementary school that she purchased. So you have really exceptional kids in a learning environment that is just like our other public schools. Tell us about what's your relationship with our local public schools. What's it like?
I have a great relationship, and I taught for KISD for many years, and I founded a child development center after I was teaching, and that has led to the growth of Oak Creek Academy. I've been very close with the superintendent, Dr. Kraft. He has since moved on, but we bounce ideas off each other, and he's always been very supportive of what I've done. He's actually sent families to me in the past. So I have a great relationship with KISD.
Yeah. And for the services that you offer, how much is the tuition?
$9,800 a school year.
Yeah. How much?
I mean, $9,800.
$9,800.
Yes.
Let's talk about, you go through your website, you talk about sort of what you're able to provide, and we hear a lot about certain rights and things that parents give up if they would choose to come to your school. Tell me about sort of what your standards are in terms of class size, inclusion, And basically the basic standards as you outline, the guarantee that you make to parents when a child comes to the Oak Creek Academy.
So we offer smaller class sizes. We don't go over 14 students in a classroom with a full-time teacher and a full-time para. The curriculum is tailored and individualized for every student. We will do a map assessment as soon as they come in so that we can see where they are, see where their learning gaps are. In our arena, we may have a 14-year-old that is still working on pre-kindergarten level, but we want to make sure that's where we start. And we're not going to give them something that they absolutely cannot handle. So we will do the map assessments and decide where we're going to start from there. And that's how we tailor the curriculum. It is individualized, and I can't stress that enough because we have so much help in the school. We have behavioral therapists that are working one-on-one with students if that is needed. We have clinical, and I say clinical because in speech, occupational, and physical therapy, in a school setting, in a traditional school setting, it's very difficult to have speech for every child more than once a week. In a clinical setting, you're going to get speech 2 to 3 times a week. Same with occupational therapy. Instead of doing it once a month, as you would in a traditional setting, you're going to get that 2 and 3 times a week as well, and just like physical therapy. Behavior therapy, that is done on a daily basis with those students.
Okay. So $9,800 a year. What about, we talk a lot about the academic setting, but tell me what else goes on there, whether it be theater arts, fine arts, and how you incorporate all that into basically a very specialized school, but really has a very traditional feel to it.
Yes. Our children learn alongside their peers, regardless of their abilities. It's a beautiful thing to see when you see a child with Down syndrome and a child with autism playing basketball and a child with ADHD flipping in the corner somewhere and coming up and wanting to play as well. We just had field day, Dr. Buckley, and it was the most amazing thing. And they dunked me in the tank about 50 times, and my body told on me the next day. But the beauty of Oak Creek and seeing these kids, well, I will tell you on field day, I have a little boy that has just come out of residential treatment. Mom and dad were just at a loss. They said, we cannot put him in a large group setting. We just know that's, the bullying that took place. And he came up to me afterwards and he hugged my neck and he said, "This is the best field day I've ever had." And he's 15. And those are the reasons. Those are my whys. That's the passion that I'm there for. They make dog treats. We sell those, and we're going to be hitting you up, so be ready.
I'm ready.
They do cooking once a week. They cook for our staff. They cook for the families. They're learning life skills as they go. Kindergarten up, they're learning life skills.
Yeah. Tell me about how your parents are involved.
Well, they have to be. It's a commitment that when they enroll in Oak Creek Academy, they have to be involved. They actually have to give 8 hours per semester of volunteer work, whether that means cleaning up the campus, organizing closets, helping in a classroom. There's just painting the walls, whatever that looks like. They're committed.
Yeah. And I want other members to be able to ask you questions, but I'll ask the elephant in the room, and I apologize for this, but what is your salary?
$60,000 a school year.
Okay. And your degrees are in what?
I have a bachelor's in education, a master's in intervention studies, and a doctorate in educational administration.
Okay. Thank you. Members, any questions for Dr. Hansen? Representative Tallarico.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Hansen, for being here. Dr. Buckley sings your praises, and he's a great advocate for your school, and I would love to visit in the interim.
And I would love for you to.
Whenever we can escape this building.
Yes.
In 2 weeks. Not having visited your campus, I'm trying to track kind of the things that you do, the best practices. Small class sizes. You said 14 kids?
14.
Wonderful. You said you got a full-time teacher and a full-time paraprofessional in each classroom?
Yes.
Amazing. You said you have parent engagement as a key part of the school. Sounds like you have trained specialists and therapists for meeting these key needs.
Yes.
I think you said the tuition $9,800
Yes.
a year. Tell us more about the finances. You get philanthropic funding in addition to that.
We are tuition-based,
So all tuition.
all tuition.
Okay.
That's how we pay our teachers.
So what is the total size of your budget roughly? I know you don't have it in front of you, but just per year.
Yeah, I don't have it in front of me, and we just work
Okay.
on it.
No, that's okay. I'm not trying. What I'm trying to get at is this legislature has $47 billion in extra money that we haven't spent yet. We could create schools just like this one all across our state.
Yes.
Public schools, charter schools, interlocal agreements. This is within our control to do exactly what you're doing.
Yes.
And my point I would make is it doesn't have to be a voucher or an ESA. We could do this. In fact, we could do a lot of what you're doing in your school in public schools all throughout the state if we really wanted to, if we really cared about this. If our governor and lieutenant governor really cared about what they say they care about, we could do exactly what you do in every public school across the state, and we have the money and the resources to do it. So I thank you for being an example of what we need to do in this state. I think the rest is on us to do the work to make our public school system adopt the same practices. And I bet every public school teacher in the state would love to have 14 kids in a class.
Oh, absolutely.
And they would love to have a full-time paraprofessional in that class. And they would love therapists and specialists to help with the kids who need the most help. And so thank you for being that light to us. I think it's up to us to take it to heart and truly do what needs doing, which is create a public school system with the same practices that you've adopted at your campus.
You're
Thank
welcome.
Representative Harrison.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you very much for being here. And all those great things that Representative Tallarico just espoused and that your school provides. Could more parents in your area or fewer parents in your area experience all the great benefits, educational services you provide if we had an education savings account program in the state of Texas?
Oh, I can tell you that we wouldn't be large enough.
So I want to peel at that for a second. So it's not abstract or theoretical for you. You make sure I heard you correctly. Yeah. On a daily basis, you live talking to parents who really want their kid to be able to go to your school. Not because they're anti or hostile to the public school, but because from their perspective, your school would be a better educational environment for their student. A, is that right? And B, if we had an ESA program like the one this bill contemplates or others, would more of those parents be able to put their child in your school?
A, you're correct, and B, our school would not be big enough. I don't turn them away, but I tour at least 5 families a week, and the majority of them leave because of the tuition price.
What's that like? How hard is that for you to have to tell a parent they can't come?
It's very difficult. That's the one reason I lay awake at night. Dr. Buckley knows that.
That's heartbreaking. It is. I think you mentioned you were a pre-K teacher. Was it Plainview ISD? That was over to you. Sorry. Yeah. Previously, you were a teacher at Plainview.
Yes, sir.
How long were you there?
So I started teaching in 2013. I've been teaching about 10 years now. None of that was in Plainview Independent School District.
What were some of the high points of that experience for you? What were some of the maybe more difficult points of your experience there?
Well, so the first couple of years I taught kindergarten. The last 7 were in pre-K. I can't begin to describe the difference between when I started and now, even though that is a short period of time in comparison to some educational professionals that have been at this for years and years. I've seen a lot more than I've cared to see. We have a lot of behavior issues. And we are not psychiatrists. We are not therapists. We are not counselors. When I signed my contract, that contract is for me to teach. That is my passion. And that's what I'm good at, and that's what I show up for every day, is to teach my kids and to spark a passion in them, an excitement for learning. When you've got bad behavior issues going on in your classroom, it's very hard to control the situation, and therefore it intrudes on everybody's learning. I have seen everything from a gun being brought to my pre-K class in a backpack on a STAR testing day. We were out in a portable. We were told that we were not to come in and disrupt during STAR testing, but I had to bring my student inside with his backpack because he had a real gun and bullets. And it scared me to death. I was beyond words, and I'm thinking this is pre-K. Last year was a very difficult year. I had some very, very difficult behavioral issues. I had a child that was out of control, violent, would literally destroy my classroom on a daily basis, just throw everything in the floor. I can't tell you how many times we had to evacuate my room, take all my other students outside while others tried to come in and take care of the situation. Not only is that a disruption, it's almost an impossibility to try to repair after certain instances like this occur, because the other kids are traumatized. They don't understand. This was pre-K.
Yeah.
And they're having to sit there and witness these outbursts, because in a lot of cases our hands have been tied and we cannot do or say anything without being reprimanded or written up ourselves.
Yeah, the issue of discipline in the classroom is certainly one that I hear from people all across the spectrum, and I appreciate you sharing that very difficult experience. I mean, so given that that's your experience there, from your perspective, would it be better if parents were empowered to work more directly with teachers on how their kids are instructed? And do you think education savings accounts could help with that objective?
Yes, sir, I do. I do think that ESAs would be favorable in situations like this. I know that there has been talk this morning about single-parent homes, different factors that factor into why the kids are having these difficulties. And I agree with all that has been said. We are now seeing kids coming into our classrooms that have been raised by parents with mental issues, and that has been passed on. And again, we've got grandparents that are trying to raise kids with these people well up in their years. They cannot physically or mentally deal with the issues that they are trying to take care of. And so therefore, these issues get brought to our classrooms on a daily basis. And we are asked to teach content, and we are asked to reach certain measures on assessments. When you've got disruptions and a whole host of behavioral issues that are taking away from that, I just cannot emphasize enough how hard it is to keep your focus. It's hard for me to teach sometimes, even with all of this chaos going on. But then you're trying to reach an audience of 4 and 5-year-olds, and they have trouble focusing anyway. And then you top it off with, for a lack of a better word, nonsense. You know, some of it is just so. It is so out of place. It is so inappropriate, and there should be zero tolerance for a lot of what we're seeing today.
Right, and I'll go to Dr. Hansen real quick, back to you on maybe more the economics of these education savings account, because one of the critiques or criticisms that I hear frequently, and including today, unfortunately, is this critique that, well, especially if you're in a rural area, there's not private schools around. Maybe not every neighborhood has a school like Oak Creek Academy. But if parents across the state of Texas, if pretty much every Texas family or a lot of Texas families suddenly had the ability to direct, the $10,000 that might be in an ESA for them, what do you think that would do to the number of educational options that might spring up once we implemented a program like that?
Well, I was just listening to Rebecca and that kind of about what you're saying. So these babies that she's having to handle essentially would come my way in what I can do with them. All of my teachers are trained registered behavior technicians. All of my aides are trained registered behavior technicians. Their classrooms are run like an applied behavior analysis. I'm looking for the word. ABA. We're ABA. We push ABA, applied behavior analysis, because everything needs to be reinforced in some way. And so when teachers aren't trained on how to do that, it's very difficult to handle 4- and 5-year-olds that are climbing on chairs and destroying the room. And so she could say, hey, I have a school down here, Oak Creek Academy, and why don't you go, talk to them and see if they can help? So that takes the pressure off of her. Mm-hmm. I can handle those behaviors. Can we handle all behaviors? No. Mm-hmm. I will tell you right now we cannot, because we don't have the money to have, sometimes a child might need 2 or 3 people on them at once. Mm-hmm. If a child, is threatening to hang themselves in the gym, I've got to have somebody that's a professional that can handle that. Yeah. So can we take all children? No, we cannot. And I know that's been something that's been talked about. With the proper staffing, yes, we could make that work.
But the point where I'm trying to get at is like this critique I hear that, there's just not enough other alternatives available. At the high level, if families had, $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 that they could direct, it doesn't go to them. This is not, I hear the term voucher used all the time.
Right.
There's not a single voucher bill that's been proposed this session, to be very clear about that. But if there's an education savings account and a parent could direct where that funding goes, do you think we might see more or less Oak Creek Academies, Oak Creek type academies pop up around the state, even in rural areas?
Well, it's not an easy thing to do. Mm-hmm. So I think that's what everybody thinks. Oh, look, there's a plaza over here. Let's open a school so we can use ESAs. Yeah. Well, that's not how it works. To become accredited, you must first be in business for 3 years. You have to have 3 years of books to show budgeting, finances, everything. They want to make sure you're going to stay around. Mm-hmm. You're going to be accredited. You have to be accredited by somebody. Mm-hmm. They're going to come in and make sure you're accountable, that you have curriculum, that you're actually doing what you say you're going to do. Mm-hmm. So, no, I don't think you're going to see a bunch of mom and pops popping up everywhere so that they can take these kids. Mm-hmm. I think the people that are invested in it, that are passionate about it, yes, I think they will take their time and make sure that they're giving to the children what is best for the children.
And just in the interest of fairness, because I've asked the other panel this, a very simple final question. Do you think parents are able to do this, A, and B, do you think it should be the parents or the government that ultimately dictate and decide where a child goes to school?
Parents should have a choice where they send their children to school.
And I'd love to hear her response to that as well.
I do think that parents have the ultimate decision in what their own children, their own flesh and blood that they brought into the world by choice. I think that is their God-given right. I think it is their God-given right to have that choice. It's not mandatory. It's a choice. And if you can use it, great. And if you don't need it, great. I see it as a win-win. I see it as empowering people that can take advantage of it to do so. And who better for them to do it for than the future of our country?
Amen.
Our children.
Let's give Texas parents a choice. Thank you for being
here. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chairman.
Members, Chairman King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Burleson, this is just for clarification purposes.
Yes, sir.
I think there was some confusion on my last line of question. So you're from Plainview, but you're currently teaching in Lockney,
I am.
and are you a contract employee there or an at will? Meaning, do you have a teaching contract, or are you substitute teaching, or I mean?
I am actually substituting and filling in for a lady that has
Okay.
been
My
off for
point to this,
maternity leave.
I think some of it got misconstrued when I was questioning you, and I didn't want anybody to think that you were representing Lockney ISD, that you're representing yourself in your
Yes, sir.
testimony. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and then the last thing is, I heard you say something about people bringing guns on campus. Mm-hmm. You're not suggesting that anyone in Lockney's ever brought a gun on campus, are you?
No, this was not in Lockney.
Okay, all right. Well, I just for
No, sir.
purposes of Chairman Buckley's bill and clarification on who you're testifying for and what your testimony is, I just think it is appropriate for us to have this discussion. And I appreciate you being here.
Yes.
All right,
Thank you.
members, any questions? Any more questions for this panel? Representative Hinojosa.
One of the struggles we have, I think the biggest struggle we have in public education, it is our biggest struggle and our biggest virtue, is that our public schools take all kids. And even the kids with disciplinary problems, even the kids whose parents can't give 8 hours of volunteer time, most parents in public schools do not give anywhere close to that. Parents who can't go to 3 parent-teacher conferences a year, but we all know how much that matters and what an advantage that gives a student in education and in life. And so the struggle is, but I've also heard parents say, I want to apply to a charter school because I want to get away from the riffraff. That's a direct quote from a parent to me. Because charter schools don't have to take kids with disciplinary issues. Private schools, again, when we talk about choice, it's not the parent's choice, it's the private school's choice to decide what are the criteria placed on the family that we accept. So the struggle is, how do we reconcile that? How do we take all kids? This is taxpayer money, public school money, and provide that space, that special nurturing space where bad things don't happen, because our parents are as much a partner in that child's education as the teacher, which frankly is not the case for most public schools and the families engaged. Since you both have experience working in public schools and non-public schools, ask for your input on that.
Do you want to speak first?
So first, let me say, in our school, we will accept anybody if we feel that we can meet their needs. So the only thing at this moment is physical disabilities, because we do not have access to our playgrounds through ADA, because we do not have the money to put in that access. And our classrooms are not conducive for like wheelchairs at this time. And potty training with older students, because we don't have the manpower for one person for a one-on-one aid. We have 14 kids, we have another aide. We don't have one-on-one aides to be able to change a 14-year-old's diaper. In a public school setting, you're going to have those children in different types of environments than what we offer. You will have kiddos that there'll be 5 in a classroom with 5 people, and they're basically one-on-one. Might have a few more numbers, but the ratio is definitely going to be lower than what we can afford to be able to have. So there is a definite difference. The other thing, too, is that there are alternative schools. If there is a child that is disrupting a classroom and is throwing, threatening, whatever that looks like, they'll be sent to an alternative school. So the public school does have a choice after those behaviors are shown. I've accepted students from 2 of our public schools in our area that were not being the behaviors were so intense and so challenging that they could not keep them. So we agreed to be able to work in partnership with them to be able to help these students, one of which did not work out because we could not support her because the family would not allow her to be supported like she needed to be supported. And they basically didn't want her disciplined. And so, not in a bad way. I just mean, hey, that is not acceptable in a classroom setting. So there's not a lot of difference, as far as acceptance of students.
So ultimately, it does come down to how much the parents are willing to give when we talk about success of a child, whether it's whether or not you can actually serve that child in the way you want to, or whether or not our public schools can make the kind of progress that this state requires of our public schools with insufficient funding.
I'm going to say not always, because I do have parents that are so incredibly busy that I don't ever see them. They pay $80 instead of doing their 8 hours, because that's what, if you don't do your 8 hours, you pay $80. That just, helps us get somebody to pay them to do it, what they couldn't volunteer to do. So there are times when I don't have that parental support, and we still make it work. So no, it's not always. And it's individualized again, so.
And I'd say 8 hours, I don't think I've ever given 8 hours to my child's school for
Well, we don't do it on every, like an 8-hour day. We break it up. We'll have a fall dance, they'll volunteer. We have a fall cleanup day, they'll volunteer. So it adds up to the 8 hours.
Even still, that's a lot of time. And I don't think I've ever
Part of our policy.
To 3 parent-teacher conferences in the school year. I've never even been asked to do that. And
well, remember, these are children with exceptionalities. Right. And so we are wanting to make sure they are making progress.
And let me say, I think that if we could get all of our families to do that, yes. If we could require them, that would be ideal for our kids.
Some of them are through Zoom, and some of them are through phone calls. They don't have to come, to be there physically. But yes, we've got to touch base so that we can show our test scores to them and make sure that we're all working together.
Let me ask this. I see that you have Melinda Gates and Walmart as sponsors for your school. And on the, did you also get $200,000 in grant funding from somewhere to support the incredible work you're able to do? And
so the Walmart grant was $750. It was to help with some food for an event that we did. I cannot speak on the Melinda Gates. I have not ever seen that unless there was something that came in just recently. I do not do the social media, and I don't do the grant writing, so I'm not going to speak on that one. We did receive the TEA grant. Unfortunately, those are, it's called the GAPS grant, and we were able to apply for that, and that's public knowledge on the website. We got, I believe, $454,000, but that is not $454,000 that I can put into my school. That is, I can pay for windows to be installed if I can buy the windows. Well, I can't buy the windows. There's a lot of, so it was wonderful money, but I'm not sure it'll ever be used.
Chairman King.
Thank you, Dr. Buckley. Mr. Chairman. Dr. Hansen, you piqued my interest when you referenced the child that it just didn't work out for, right, from the disciplinary reasons, whatever, and you had to remove the child from your school. Did the child return back to the ISD of which they came, or do you know?
To my knowledge, that child did go back to that ISD.
Okay, and so did the ISD have the ability to say, you're still a discipline problem, we don't want you either?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what happened to her. I mean, this is an extreme,
right, and
extreme case.
My point to that is, And the reason I'm asking that, you brought it up, and the detractors from your position, one of the things they say all the time, and one of the things I happen to believe, if a child has a disciplinary problem, $8,000, $10,000, $100,000 likely isn't going to change the child's behavior. And I know you're dealing with a whole other subset of kids, but I'm just from a disciplinary standpoint, I'm just saying if the kid is a disciplinary problem and it's never the kid's fault, the voucher, the ESA, whatever, isn't going to change the child's behavior. So if it doesn't work out wherever they went, there's still a constitutional obligation to the ISD if the child resides within those taxing boundaries. They have to take them back, but yet the ESA has been spent. I know Dr. Buckley's worked on language in this bill to allow the money, what was left of it, to go back into the pool.
Yes.
Which I think is a great first step to this. But I guess my question for you is, do you understand that line of argument to your position that you have the ability to say, hey, we can't help you here, it didn't work out, but that ISD doesn't?
They do, because they're sent to, sometimes they're sent to residential. I mean, that's a decision that has to be made. This is probably a case with this child that's probably where it was going, was residential treatment. Alternative schools, I mean, so there are options, and just like I need to have options, I have to keep everybody safe. If I've got a child that is threatening and throwing chairs, and I can't intervene with the behavior therapist because the parent says, no, I don't agree with ABA, well, that's a problem, because I'm doing what's best for this child. And so, you can't help somebody in that case.
Exactly. But then the public school, the traditional ISD, is still, whether their plan is to put them in an alternative school, whatever, they are still the responsibility of the public school. You can say, I can't help you, go back to public school, and it's still on the taxpayer. There is a difference there on what you're able to do as a private school when it comes to what children you accept or don't accept for whatever reason, versus the constitutional obligation of the public school. That's the only point I'm trying to make.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
All right. So throughout your tenure, throughout the time that Oak Creek's been established, are more kids turned away because you're unable to provide the services, or more kids turned away because parents can't afford the services?
They cannot afford the services.
Okay.
No, I always tell the parent, we will give it a go. And unless it's an older child with potty training issues, then we cannot, because we just don't have the manpower. But if it's discipline issues, we're going to try it, because every day is a new day at Oak Creek. And that's what I tell them. You got in trouble yesterday, tomorrow's a new day. We're going to start over.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Hansen, Ms. Bertelsen. Members, any other questions for this panel?
Can I ask her one question?
Yes, Dr. Allen.
How much do your teacher aides make?
$16 an hour.
They get paid by the hour.
Yes, ma'am.
And how many hours do they work a day?
Usually 8.
8?
Yes, usually 40 hours a week.
Thank you.
All right. Members, any more questions? Thank you both very much for being here. We appreciate it. Chair calls Michelle Smith and Paige Williams. Okay, we show you red shirt is Paige Williams on behalf of the Texas Classroom Teachers Association testifying against the bill. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And we show you red shirt as Michelle Smith as on behalf of Raise Your Hand Texas testifying against the bill. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. Good. Yeah. Nope. Good afternoon. I was going to say good morning. Good afternoon.
Want me to go first? Sure. Okay. Good afternoon, Chairman Buckley and members of the committee. I'm Paige Williams. I'm the Director of Legislation for the Texas Classroom Teachers Association. I'm also a mom to 2 public school students. TCTA appreciates the invite to give input regarding the committee substitute for Senate Bill 8. I am testifying in opposition to the bill. TCTA remains steadfastly opposed to vouchers in any form, including education savings accounts. We've learned through charter schools and districts of innovation that a foot in the door is likely to lead to expansion regardless of whether the program is effective or efficient. Charter schools on the whole have not performed quite as well as traditional public schools, and districts of innovation have demonstrably used the ability to exempt themselves from state laws as a matter of convenience rather than for innovative educational strategies. And yet they proliferate. Introducing private school vouchers will only exacerbate the problem of a chronically underfunded public school system. Texas consistently ranks near the bottom among states in pure student funding. At best, depending on what ranking system you're using, we remain under the national average. Our state will struggle to fund 3 education systems: traditional public schools, charter schools, and now private schools, particularly at a time when students are still in need of additional funding to help them recover from the pandemic. We acknowledge that the committee substitute for Senate Bill 8 has included a nod to accountability by requiring students benefiting from the ESA program to take the required standardized test, but we believe that this simply ensures that private schools will be more particular with regard to the students that they choose to admit. This bill specifically provides that the program cannot unduly limit the ability of an education service provider, vendor, or educational product or program participant to determine admissions and enrollment practices, policies, and standards. As for the merits of the testing proposal in Senate Bill 8, we acknowledge that there appear to be some improvements. We support the reduction of high-stakes consequences, for example, particularly the elimination of the requirement that high school graduation be contingent on the passage of end-of-course exams. But it's improvement to note that this proposal was hastily introduced to the education community with very little time for us to thoroughly review its requirements and its implications. To our knowledge, a large portion of it was developed without stakeholder input, or at least this stakeholder input. Something as important and complex as standardized testing should not be a last-minute enticement to vote for vouchers. The introduction of through-year testing raises concerns about increasing the number of tests with little assurance that these tests will be shorter, less stressful, or more appropriate than the current assessment system, though the proposal may have merit. Not only are we unconvinced that the proposed assessment system is an improvement, but even if it does provide relief from the current testing problems, it is not worth the introduction of vouchers to our state. As we have stated repeatedly, we believe that lawmakers have a rare opportunity this session to help students, teachers, and schools. We are disappointed that so much attention is focused on legislation like this that we believe will harm public schools and that does nothing to address our teacher shortage. We ask you to not allow Senate Bill 8 to progress, but to keep your focus on school funding, teacher salaries, and working conditions that will help ensure our students are given the best education possible by high-quality, experienced teachers at well-funded schools.
All right, thank you. All right, Dr. Smith.
Good afternoon. I'm Michelle Smith. I'm the Executive Director of Raise Your Hand Texas, speaking in opposition to Senate Bill 8. First of all, thank you so much for taking the time to hear this bill. I know it's a really busy part of session for you, and we greatly appreciate your efforts. I'll start with the special education voucher in the bill. If you're going to have a special education voucher, the amount needs to be much larger per student. Some of our students in public schools that are special ed students cost $50,000 to $100,000 a year. This bill only calls for about $9,500 per student. We've looked at the 43 accredited private schools that primarily serve special education students that Representative Allison referenced earlier in the hearing. The average cost of those 43 schools is $19,000 a year, and some of them cost as much as $50,000 a year. So our special ed students simply aren't going to be able to afford to go to those campuses. Some of these private schools also cater to special education students that don't have the highest needs that we're having to provide in public schools. So for example, we looked at some of their websites. They have highly selective admission requirements, such as students have to be free from significant medical or physical concerns, free from significant behavior concerns. Students are expected to fit the program we offer. They have to have average or above average intelligence. They have to do multi-day visits before they can get into the school to make sure that that school is the right fit for that child. And the students, this one really got me. The students must have a positive or at least neutral effect on the school community. Otherwise, they will not be admitted or they will be removed. We are talking about children who are being excluded or prohibited from attending particular campuses, and it's fine for a private school to do that if they're just a private school, but if they're taking taxpayer dollars, that language simply isn't acceptable. The legislature also needs to be prepared for rapid expansion of vouchers. Special education vouchers typically serve as a gateway to larger voucher programs. We've looked into the data. 7 states started as very small special education vouchers, and all of them expanded to larger programs. 2 of the 7 states now have universal voucher programs that primarily benefit families whose children never attended public schools. Arkansas, example, it started with $147,000 a year, and it's now at $57 million per year. Utah started at $607,000 a year, and it's now $54 million per year. Do the math for Texas, it's going to be a very large cost as these programs expand. Voucher programs never stay small, and that is by design. Moving on to vouchers for F-rated campuses. If you're going to have a voucher for an F-rated campus, you need to do something for the students who will inevitably be left behind in those F-rated schools. They will need highly trained teachers, wraparound services, and smaller class sizes. You need to base the F rating on something besides a test. F ratings in elementary and middle school campuses are completely based on standardized tests, and the cut score for those tests are set by someone who is not an elected official. The question to ask yourselves is, are you okay with a school being rated an F and then opening the gate for a voucher solely based on a standardized test? And if so, shouldn't an elected body, such as the legislature or the State Board of Education, have a more active role regarding cut scores and progress measures before handing taxpayer dollars to voucher programs? Regarding the testing and accountability section of the bill, Raise Your Hand is not opposed to testing. We value high-quality data to be able to inform instruction and assess student needs. We do oppose an accountability system that is based completely on a test, which is still the case for grades 3 through 8 in this bill. It doesn't matter if it's STAR, TSIA, or anything else. Those F ratings are still just based on standardized tests in grades 3 through 8. There are bills moving through the legislative process. We have participated actively in those conversations, and I brought you a report that we worked on for 18 months that has a whole lot of really great recommendations that you can look through and think about as you're pondering the specific legislation in this bill. But the bill that was considered and voted out by this committee is not Senate Bill 8. Those are very different bills, and you need to take that into consideration if you're going to use that as the reason to vote this bill out of committee. We do thank you for requiring voucher students to take the state-mandated test. The bill does not, however, hold private schools accountable or have a mechanism to pull underperforming private school students out. My guess is if this bill passes, the legislature will need to come back in a future session and create an A through F rating for private schools so they can protect those students who are being underserved. Sure. In summary, Raise Your Hand Texas continues to oppose Senate Bill 8. There's still time this session to improve student outcomes through investments in special education, investments in our educators through raises, or even just an increase to the basic allotment. We're depending on the members of the House Public Education Committee to continue to stand up for 5.4 million students, and we look forward to supporting you on this path.
All right. Thank you. Members, any questions for this witness? Representative Harrison. Or
Thank you,
these witnesses, excuse me.
Yes, right. Thank you, Chairman, and thank y'all very much for being here. You mentioned several points in your testimony, Ms. Williams, and I'll maybe start at the beginning where you talked about your concern that the ESA wasn't perhaps big enough. I'm sorry, Ms. Smith. Your concern that the ESA wasn't big enough. You mentioned the resources that public schools have, or the requirements to be funded there to take care of SPED kids. Under this bill that Chairman Buckley has brought forth, or the other bills that are contemplated, would any of them require a special ed kid to leave their current public school?
No, I don't believe so.
So all the massive amounts of resources that they have there would still be available to them under this bill or other similar bills that the legislature is contemplating. Is that right?
I don't know that I understand your question. Are you asking students that continue to stay in public schools are still going to have resources?
Well, so if I heard your testimony correctly, at the top of it, you were lamenting, or you were criticizing the bill by saying the ESA wasn't near big enough to give a sped kid the amount of money they would need at a private school relative to the relatively much greater amount of resources that a public school currently has to be able to take care of that sped kid. Was that a fair, accurate representation of your critique?
I am not a special education expert. I do know that school districts are doing the best to provide, that they can to provide services for special education students. I have heard school districts talk about not having all the resources that they need to meet those requirements.
Sure, but the number that I heard in your testimony, and please correct me if I heard you wrong, was 50 to 100,000. I mean, these were big numbers you were
Those are big
out.
numbers.
Huge numbers. But those resources would still be available to that family in their public school if they chose to stay there, right?
Theoretically, yes.
Is there any way in which they wouldn't?
I think that we have looked at some people have looked at recommendations this session from the interim committee, the special committee on special education services, and have said that the state is currently underfunding our special education programs to the tune of $2 billion.
No, again, fixing public schools is something we all agree on, but I'm just trying to understand, again, because we're hearing this bill, is there anything in this bill, if a kid's getting, $50,000 worth of resources in their public school, is there anything in Chairman Buckley's bill that would require them to leave that public school where they're getting all those resources?
No.
Okay, so they could stay there?
Yes.
Okay. Just want to make sure I understood that correct, because I'm not sure why that would be a concern if they can stay and continue to get those great resources. And you mentioned other states that have had programs that started out small and that over time they grew. Why would they grow? What must be true for a school choice program to expand?
That's a great question, and we wonder about that as well. I don't have data on that as far as why parents have continued to choose other avenues or why states have continued to expand those programs. I'm just raising a cautionary flag for the state legislature that if we are already 43rd in the country as far as per student funding, and there seems to be a scarcity of funds, then I think we have a responsibility as a legislature to look at those cautionary flags.
Although you started your answer by saying you don't know why and don't have data, you actually you answered the question in there. You said it's because parents continue to choose. These programs are only growing because they are overwhelmingly popular with parents. Once they realize they may have the opportunity to put their child in an educational setting that is best suited for that child, more and more parents across the country are demanding these programs. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
Representative Hinojosa.
Thank you, Chairman. Have you heard one of the concerns from parents who attend public school that that their child is exposed to kids they don't want their child to be exposed to because public schools take all kids?
Yes.
And I previously said a quote that was said to me is getting my child away from the riffraff. Is that a sentiment that you have heard?
I have heard those, absolutely.
And in fact, that's one of our challenges and our greatest virtues of our public schools, is that our public schools take all kids, and we probably should be providing the resources to meet that reality in our public schools, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. I've also taught those kids. And we try to balance the needs of every child with the needs of every other child in the classroom. Those are not easy decisions, and those are decisions that our experts are having to make on a daily basis in their classrooms. And I value their input. I valued the input of all the other teachers in my school, and they're trying to make the best decisions on behalf of every kid.
Thank you. Representative Harrison asked you a question. If a child left the public school with a special education voucher, wouldn't that child be able to go back and quote, wouldn't the resources still be there? You said, I think so. But isn't this a zero-sum game? If a child leaves the public school does not get funding for that child. There's no hold harmless in this bill. Are you reading this differently?
So my understanding is when the child leaves the school and those resources go elsewhere, that if they return to the school, some of those resources are going to follow that child back to the school district. Is that your question?
That is my question. I don't see that in the bill. And so if that's the case, I would love to be pointed to where that is. I do see that our schools aren't held to account for the child's performance on the STAR test if that child returns, but I don't see where the school, in fact, gets full funding for the child that has left and then has returned. So I would love to see where that is in the bill or any kind of hold harmless.
There's also a concern about children. I think there's legislation, there's language within the bill that talks about the school district being held harmless for the performance of that child for the remainder of the school year. Our concern as an organization, and there's data to prove this, that every time that a child hops from campus to campus to campus, and we seem to be headed in a direction where parents are constantly shopping for the right environment for their student performance declines statistically every time they move to a different campus. So wouldn't it be better if we as a state were investing in making sure that that student's campus that they're primarily, going to based on where they live is as high quality of a campus as possible so parents don't have to go shop. The problem is that when those kids leave, their performance is going down. It's inevitable. And so if that student leaves, goes to a voucher school, comes back, they're unhappy, they move somewhere else, statistically their performance is going down again and again and again.
And so one of the great values that your organization brings to our policymaking here is the research and data that you've provided to many of us. We see you, I see you, and I know many other members see you all as a source for reliable data when it comes to decision making in this policy arena. The way I read the bill, if we look to page 75, is while there, and I do appreciate this about the bill, while there is reporting that will come back to this body on outcomes about this ESA, on page 79, it says the report must cover a period of not less than 5 years. And so I read that to mean we won't get feedback until the year 2028 about how this is working in our public schools.
Yeah, I share your concern. It talks about a minimum of 5 years, so I'm wondering if we're not going to hear anything else about the program for those 5 years. It also, the group that is administering the program, the vendor that is administering the program, they're the ones that are going to be evaluating the program under that language. And so, of course, they're going to make it look like that this is the best thing since sliced bread because they're wanting to make more money off of the program. So I have concerns not only about the length of time before we have that data, but also the people who are talking about the quality of the program itself.
And if I just might make a comment on that as well, that commission is abolished and later on, and so I don't know how useful that information is going to be if we're only getting it once after 5 years. It's not an ongoing commitment to reevaluate continually after that. I think we have seen from, as I referenced earlier, districts of innovation, we don't have any data collection about that as well. And so we would just urge any kind of new program that is introduced. We haven't seen the legislative appetite to collect ongoing data and make sure that outcomes are in fact improved by the programs we're introducing.
My final question to both of you, if you have input on this, is when I had heard that we would be focused on a special education ESA or voucher, it was my hope that we would maintain what has been an essential component for making decisions about educating our kids in special education, and that would be the ARD process. And so I would ask, but that's not in the bill. It's not a requirement of this bill. It's not mentioned in this bill. And so I would ask the two of you, please, for any kind of feedback you can give this body on the importance of the ARD process in making these decisions.
There's a very specific process that they have to go through, and I'll let you speak to the specifics of it as far as the process itself. I will say, as a parent of a child who went through that process, I did not value the opinion or the expertise of the educators that were in that process with me as much as I should have. And I'm a teacher, and I still made the wrong decision on behalf of my kid because I didn't listen to what they had to say necessarily. And I really worry about families making decisions about moving their kids to other environments without the input of experts and really taking that expertise into account.
Well, the ARD process, the recognized parties are the parents and the district, the educators who participate and help plan a student's IEP are actually not recognized parties to the ARD process. They just give input. And so that's who I represent, are those educators. And one of the things that I help educators with regard to IEP development is when they need to recognize and request additional supports, when there needs to be a modification of an IEP and how to communicate that to parents and to their district. But one of the things I do want to point to with regard to the ARD process, in addition, we talked about discipline earlier with some of the other testifiers, is there are a lot of disciplinary rights with regard to students who are receiving special education services. So some of the options that are available for students who are not under special education aren't available for those students. You can't just put them in an alternative school, as was mentioned. They can't have a change in placement for more than 10 days without initiating an ARD and having to go through that whole IEP process, or a behavioral intervention plan has to be created. And the process to change a behavioral intervention plan that is not working can be arduous as well. So there are a lot of protections with regard to the services they receive educationally, but also behaviorally. I know that one of the things that CTA has advocated for all session, and which we would much rather be talking about today, is legislation that has been proposed but not heard that would put behavioral interventionists on every campus to ensure that every student is served, and teachers get the assistance that they need and students get the assistance that they need, and it would go a long way in providing all students the education that they deserve.
Do you have an estimate on how much that would cost?
We don't. I would, and part of that is because there would be a pipeline problem, and so you would have to kind of slowly introduce so that you can make sure that you have behavioral interventionists on every campus, or per district that could be shared among campuses, but it was also included as part of a recommendation in the interim report for this committee.
Members, any more questions? Representative Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this question is going to be for both of y'all, but I want to go back to the testing and accountability portion of the committee substitute. And both of you, if I understand correctly, expressed some opposition to that portion. So my question is, can you kind of help me understand the differences, the key differences between the reforms in this bill and to testing and accountability, and what this committee and the House as a whole, and y'all's group specifically, raise your hand, I know, ecstatically supported what was in 4402. So help me understand the differences there.
Ecstatically is correct. The focus, so there's some things that were in 4402 in our recommendations that are in this particular bill, primarily the through testing. We really do feel like that there needs to be something besides just the one test on one day at the end of the school year. The challenge is that, and y'all spoke about it a little bit ago, in grades 3 through 8, that A through F rating under this bill is still only going to be based on standardized testing. And what was really looked at in 4402 and also in the report that we have is looking at other indicators besides just standardized testing. So what are the other things that we need to look at as a committee, as a school district, as a state, to say these are important, we need to prioritize these, as opposed to just prioritizing the test. So we've already had concerns about the high stakes nature. I don't think that's going to go away when you have 3 tests instead of 1 test. Unfortunately, it's still going to, those campuses are probably still going to be on lockdown. They're still going to be sending away parents and visitors and saying, oh my gosh, we got to take the test. We've got to start looking at other things that are indicators of a high quality campus, because that's what parents are looking for. They want to know lots of things that are going on in their campus and if it's a good campus or not.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, this may not be the appropriate time for me to ask you this question, but do you agree that those are the key differences between the testing required, the reforms that we did in 4402 and this bill? From my understanding, you took stakeholder input and discussion, and you and Representative Bell, on the needed reforms to testing and accountability. Not only built 4402, but also incorporated those into this bill as well.
Yeah, one of the original drafts of 4402 early on, and that, of course, we heard the draft we heard, and I know folks supported it and did mention and did reference the TSIA testing, and there's been some information come out of some commission reports on how we need to move that. I do agree, though, that what this committee sub does not contemplate is the change in the indicators, the additional indicators to get the 3 through 8 off of just the simple, STAR test or nothing sort of indicator. So that is fair. And I think that when you look at an issue that has been, we've all said it. We all pass the obligatory bill every session to, quote, ban the STAR, and then we all go on about our way. But that, true educational reform is going to begin, when we begin to really have serious conversations and to understand whether or not our A through F system is doing what it's supposed to do. And I have never said it was. And so if this begins that conversation moving towards something that, this is something, accountability system that tells me something I didn't know before I could guess, I think that's important. And, our campuses need data. Our teachers need it. But it's so much more complex what goes on in a public school campus today than what the label that gets to apply to a district. And I think the most important thing is you literally, and we don't talk about this enough, you see teachers choose to go to the hardest campuses. A lot of times we seem to think about the other way. But I know districts that they make a deliberate effort to get the best teachers at the hardest campuses. And it takes some time to turn it around. And you throw COVID on top of that. I've got some personal experience with that. You throw COVID on top of it, and that grade is not a true representation. And so, that's where we're at in terms of accountability. But my hope is that the exercise we're going through today, if we don't use any kind of momentum and don't kill each other over this thing, is that we can move the ball forward, I think, on some important education accountability assessment reforms as we move forward. So, long answer to your short question.
Sometimes it's the unintended consequences. You're talking about really important topics and valuable topics, and then you go home and somebody else says, somebody says, why did you do this? You know what I mean? I don't want y'all to go home and somebody say, well, now we're just doing 3 tests instead of 1 test. Thank you so much. Yeah. It's really hard to explain to people the stress that families are feeling and that they're transferring to you is not about the test. It's about the accountability system. It's what we're doing with that test. And so if it's just based on the test, that's what they're responding to. That's what teachers are responding to, parents are responding to, kids are responding to. If you expand that accountability system, and I'm not talking about watering it down, I'm talking about expanding it with actual reliable indicators, then parents begin to understand what's actually happening in their school, and the extreme amount of stress is taken off of that test, and we can look at other things.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Harrison.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you. Just wanted to clarify because it was referenced. My previous question, I think, was probably unintentionally misrepresented. I wasn't actually asking about what would happen if a sped child left a public school and then returned. What would happen to those dollars? I do think, from my reading of the bill, that Chairman Buckley has actually thoughtfully handled that particular case were to arise in the bill that he's laid out. My question was more, I was trying to clarify what I view is a lot of fear-mongering around the issue about about the impact of school choice on public schools, because I firmly believe that if a family's got access to, as your testimony said, if that's true, $50,000 to $100,000 worth of resources for that sped child, they're most likely going to stay there. And given it, just the fact that we would give parents or families an option, that doesn't in any way, shape, or form lead to quote-unquote defunding public schools, which is what I hear from organizations like yours all the time. And I think it's just factually incorrect. And I would ask you, I mean, when you talk about there are certain states where you start small and it grows and grows and grows and grows and it's big, the implication is that somehow public schools are diminishing and diminishing and diminishing. But the data don't show that. And I'm curious if you know, in the state that has the highest utilization rate of ESAs, what percentage of kids are in an ESA program?
I'd have to pull that data for you. I don't have it in front of me.
I looked at it over the weekend. In the state that's got the largest percentage of kids in an ESA program, it's between 5% and 5%. And the biggest one in the country. So public schools are always going to be the institution that educates most of our kids. ESA and school choice programs absolutely do not defund them. And in Texas, I firmly believe that whether it's this bill or some other bill, most parents, most families are still going to choose to send their kids to the local public schools that they know and that they love and that are doing a great job for their kids. So I think it's very important to put in the record.
Sure.
In the biggest ESA program in the country, which is not in Texas, 5 to 5.5% of kids take advantage of these ESAs.
And I agree with you that if we're going to allow students to leave the public schools and they cost $100,000 to serve adequately at their public school, then the state needs to give them a $100,000 voucher to make sure that that child is going to be served. I'm not here to just protect the system. I am here to protect the needs of every child. If they need $10,000, if they need $50,000, if they need $100,000, then provide for the needs of that child. It's going to get really expensive, but you need to protect the child and make sure that they're getting the services that they deserve. That $9,000 is not going to do it. And I would rather for them to stick with their school districts who's trying to say, we're trying to help your child, the state's putting in resources, the feds are putting in resources, everybody's putting in resources to try to help your kid, but instead we're just going to be like, well, here's your $9,000, and they're going to be right back in the public school system within 6 to 12 months because they're going to realize that they can't get quality services somewhere else for that cost when they cost $50,000 in the public school system.
So just make sure I hear you right. If the ESA was bigger, raise your hand, Texas would support it.
I'm happy to have that conversation with you.
Okay.
That's a big price.
I'd love to have that conversation with you.
That would be fun.
Just a final question in terms of giving parents a choice. Given that, according to NAEP data, only 23% of Texas 8th graders are proficient in reading and mathematics, is what we are doing right now working?
I think you've had that conversation today.
I'm asking you, though, you're testifying on the bill.
I think
you're actually testifying against the bill.
Sure. I think that our organization has always valued data, has always valued testing. We want to have those conversations with you. If you look at the states that are knocking it out of the park, the ones that are referenced in this bill of being in the top 5, New York is funding at $25,000 per kid. Connecticut is funding at $20,000 per kid. Texas is funding at less than $10,000 per kid. So if we're going to talk about making sure every kid is successful and bumping up those NAEP scores, then you have to have a conversation about what other states, what top 5 states are spending on their kids, and Texas is not even close to that.
Last question. Should parents
I'm going to have to stop.
Yeah, go ahead. We got time. You're right.
Right
Thank you,
there.
Chairman.
All right. Thank you. Members, it looks like we need to stop here for today. Excuse me, I was going to say this afternoon. The chair withdraws the committee substitute. There's no objection. SB 8 will be left pending. Chair hears none. SB 8 is left pending. If there's no objection, the committee will stand in recess until a final adjournment or recess of the House or during reading and referral of bills if permission is granted. The chair hears no objection. The Committee on Public Education now stands in recess.